There were, of course, fundamental problems with eugenicist science. They were making the mistake of assuming that life produces like, that brilliant parents produce brilliant children, and criminals produce criminals. Intelligence, indolence, dependence, and other human qualities are not, however, unit characters, traits passed on a single gene from a parent to a child. And as Mendel's work suggested, in reproduction, genes combine and are expressed in complex ways. Particularly for some of human qualities eugenics focused on, the eugenicist plan of ending feeble-mindedness simply by preventing the feeble-minded from producing had no basis in genetics. The eugenicists had failed to take environment factors into account. There were many reasons people were poor or indolent or scored low on intelligence tests. They were unrelated to biology. In a few years, Thomas Hunt Morgan, a Columbia University geneticist who would go on to win a Nobel Prize, would argue that many human differences were more than a result of demoralizing social conditions than hereditary. Supporters of eugenics had little interest, however, in the effect of impoverished childhood on a poor education on life outcomes. The eugenicists stuck to their own belief about genetics. When Bleecker van Wagenen, a leading American eugenicist and a trustee of the Vineland School, addressed the first institutional eugenics congress in London, he listed groups whose flaws should be regarded as heredity in origin. He included criminals, paupers, the blind and deaf, and the deformed. Well, of course, why wouldn't they? Van Wagenen argued that they would be eliminated from the human stock. The weakness of the science did not slow the spread of eugenics in the United States. While eugenics and theoreticians continued to refine their views on defective groups, the criminal anthropologists kept up their field work on what they regarded as hereditary cursed communities. The movement's main focus in these early years was a practical concern, an obsession with what came to be known as the menace of feeble-mindedness. Leading eugenicists were starting to warn that the single biggest threat to the nation's hereditary stock was feeble-mindedness, and they were studying the problem intensively. Some of the most urgent warnings were coming from Henry Goddard of the Vineland Training School from feeble-minded girls and boys, the inventor of the categories of idiots, imbeciles, and morons. In 1912, Goddard published his own enormously influential work of criminal anthropology. Unlike many of its predecessors, which discussed a wide range of defects, Goddard's book concerns itself with a single problem, feeble-mindedness. In the Kallikak family, a study in the heredity of feeble-mindedness, Goddard examined 6 generations of New Jersey family and showed how it supported his theories of inherited mental defect. Goddard began his tale during the Revolutionary War with Martin Kallikak, a fictitious name like all the others in the book. Kallikak produced 2 lines of descendants, one through his wife, a, quote, woman of his own quality, and another through, quote, a feeble-minded girl he met in a tavern. The line from the Kallikak's wife, Goddard found, included generations of doctors, judges, and other successful men. The line from the feeble-minded girl was rife with prostitutes, criminals, and epileptics. Goddard presented the Kallikaks as a natural experiment in heredity, and he drew larger lessons from it. He was not concerned, he set at the outset, with the low-grade idiot. Some had, quote, proposed the lethal chamber, he noted, but he said somewhat wistfully that he saw no probability he thought no probability society would support mass execution of its least intelligent members. The idiot is, quote, indeed the loathsome, Goddard said, but fortunately, because he was unlikely to become a parent, quote, he lives his life and is done. What? The problem, he said, was what to do about the higher grade feeble-minded. 2 years later, Goddard published Feeble-Mindedness, Its Causes and Consequences, a 599-page study that drew on cases he observed at the Vinland School. In his new work, he continued to warn about the menace of feeble-mindedness. As much as 2% of the school population might be feeble-minded, he said, and the causes were mostly hereditary, quote, end quote. Not only was feeble-mindedness a problem in its own right, he argued, but it underlies all of our social problems, he said. Marshalling questioning data, Goddard contended that as much as 50% of the criminal, prostitutes, and almshouse residents were feeble-minded. What was at stake in the war of feeble-mindedness, he insisting, was nothing less than, quote, the future welfare of the race. Oof. Goddard was only one of many influential voices arguing the nation to awaken to the threat posed by the feeble-minded in their midst. Louis Tarman, the Stanford professor who revisited the Binet-Simon test, warned urgently about feeble-mindedness among the young. In his 1970 essay, Feeble-Minded Children in the Public School of California, he said feeble-mindedness was one of the most important factors in the delinquency, crime, alcoholism, pauperism, prostitution, and the spread of venereal disease. He estimated that more than 1% of the California students were affected. The nation's universities churned out large quantities of these reports, all expressing alarm. Samuel J. Holmes, a University of California zoology professor, warned in The Trend of the Race, a study of present tendencies in the biological development of civilized mankind, that the feeble-minded were reproducing at a rapid rate. The best blood of the nation is its most priceless possession, he insisted. Holmes ended his book with a plaintive question, quote, the race has its fate in its own hands to make or to mar. Will it ever take itself in hand and shape its own destiny? End quote. Ooh, wow.